It's very easy to use a lot of words and to write complicated. That's the easiest thing. But what is hard to manage is to write in a simple and deep way.
One of the things that strikes me as most attractive about Jon Fosse is the way he wears his erudition so lightly. Despite the obvious depth of his learning and the great complexity of the ideas expressed in this huge variety of writing, he gets his points across in this conversation so straightforwardly. And he left me, at least, with some really beautiful images. A picture of him writing alone in this place he calls a shelter from the wind. The vision of him writing not just with his head, but with his whole body. And an image of him gazing at a single point out of the window and extracting, well, pretty much everything you can from that place. And a bit like when you've seen a good movie, I found these scenes from the conversation replaying in my head for days afterwards. So I truly hope that you will find this conversation with Jon Fosse every bit as captivating as I did.
This is Nobel Prize Conversations. Our guest is Jon Fosse, the 2023 Literature Laureate. He received the prize for his innovative plays and prose which give voice to the unsayable. Your host is Adam Smith, Chief Scientific Officer at Nobel Prize Outreach. This podcast was produced in cooperation with Fundación Ramón Areces. Jon Fosse is a Norwegian poet, novelist and playwright. He's published almost 70 works, which have been translated into over 40 languages. In this conversation, he talks about finding his Catholic faith after seeking solace in cathedrals while touring with his plays, his fascination with Mark Rothko's paintings, and how he can tell if a book is written with a pen. But first, we enter Jon Fosse's world, a world dominated by silence.
When we were corresponding about this podcast, I asked you whether you had a pair of headphones you could wear, and you said, no, I don't listen to music. That's quite a surprising statement. Is that true? You really don't listen to music?
Yeah, that's true. I only listen to music when I go to concerts. Yeah, and that's the only time. When I was young, I was very much into music. When I was a teenager, I listened to music all the time. I played the guitar, both the classical guitar and small pieces by Bach, and electric guitar in a kind of boys band. Then I stopped playing and I stopped listening to music in my late teens, and I started writing. And so it is, yeah. The only thing I listen to is when I'm driving longer distances, I'm listening to audiobooks. Yeah.
Well, I suppose the writing became the music, if you like.
The writing became the music, yeah, no doubt.
It is unusual to live without it, and most people put it on as a sort of background. You'd find that disturbing, would you, to have it?
I always find it disturbing, and when I'm in a room where they play music, I try not to hear it. Yesterday I went to my dentist, and of course he had music in the background. So, yeah, as far as I manage it, I try not to listen to it, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to avoid.
I have some friends that are musicians, and I've been doing readings together with them. And when we take a cab, when we are going to do a job, they always dislike to hear music. And they always ask the taxi driver to take away the music. I think this music, it's disturbing for a lot of people. And there's a lot of noise pollution, to put it that way, all over the place.
Exactly. It's harder and harder to avoid it, depending on where you live, but basically it's everywhere. And it's a particularly interesting thing to discuss with you, of course, because you're renowned for putting silence in your work,
yes,
in your plays and also in your prose. Your search for silence extends to just everyday life and trying to avoid the surrounding hubbub.
I never watch television. I never listen to the radio. I hardly ever go to see a film. I go to the theater now and then, and as I said, now and then I go to a concert with classical music. I love organ concerts where they are playing music by Bach, the great one.
You grew up in a very quiet place.
Yeah, you can say so, yeah.
It was a landscape that, if you like, evokes quietness. It's tempestuous, I suppose, with its weather and its dramatic scenery, the west of Norway. But at the same time, if people were looking for retreat, I suppose it's the sort of place that they would go.
Yeah, some places at least, but we are also famous for all the bad weather. So there's a lot of rain. It rains most of the time, and it's quite windy there. You imagine Norway, it's mountain, it's snow, but in my coastal landscape, it isn't like that. It's more like Britain or Ireland.
Dark, depressing, yes.
Yes, very dark, very depressing. It can be grey for months. But I like it. There are many nuances in the grey if you start looking at it that way. And suddenly it opens up and you see the blue sky and like that. It's silent and it's grey.
I suppose what you just said, many nuances in grey, and then suddenly it opens up and you see the blue sky, is also a description of your writing.
Yeah, and it's the same if you live by the sea, either it's a fjord or by the ocean. It's always changing the color of the sea. It's never the same, and neither are the movements. You have the basic rhythm of the waves, but it keeps on changing. It's the same and it's changing all the time. So I grew up by the sea, by the Hardanger fjord, and now I'm living in central Oslo. But I keep a place, two places in the western part of Norway, and one is as close to the sea as you can get. The balcony is going over the sea, and my cabin is with a view to where the Sognefjord goes into the North Sea, the ocean. So there's an opening there where I can see the ocean too. Both places are really great for me, but you need to like it. In my family aren't that happy with the sea and the rain.
There's people acquainted with your writing will know there are often people staring out at a single point.
Yeah.
Oslo, for instance, in Alice at the Fire, staring at the sea, concentrating on small changes. Obviously, it's something very important for you.
Yeah, this situation, someone looking out the window, that's one of the recurring situations in my writing. And when it occurred the first time, I don't exactly remember, but since then, it keeps on coming back. In Septology, it's the same. Many places, he's just looking at the fjord. I've written a play called A Summer's Day, and the basic situation there is an elderly lady looking at the sea. That goes through the whole play. And she is remembering the day when her husband disappeared on the sea, and retelling that day in a way.
And it's obviously a very personal experience for you.
I simply grew up, as I said, close to a fjord. When I had to walk to school, we walked along the fjord for a couple of kilometers. And you hear this sound of the waves, of the sea, and the way it keeps changing all the time, the nuances. I think where you grew up, it's very formative in many ways. Of course, you learn a language in a place, and this or that, the socialect or dialect or normalized language or whatever. You learn it in a place, and you connect the words also to the place where you learn it. Where you first learn the word window, you connected to the first window you saw and understood what a window is. The same goes for everything, I think, for such basic words as roof, floor, stone, water.
That rootedness, yes. Tell me about your writing, the actual process of writing. Clearly, it's something that gives you great pleasure. How did you find originally that it was a pleasurable activity to write?
I guess I was around 12 years old. As I told you, I was playing the guitar a lot, and I also tried to write small tunes, and I wrote both the lyrics and the melody. And that was the first thing I wrote. And then I tried also to write small poems and short stories. So I started very early. Somehow I liked it. It gave me shelter from the wind, to put it that way. I found a place where I could stay alone and do whatever I wanted in my writing. And it was in a kind of opposition to the writing in the school, what you had to write there, almost the opposite. I found, as I normally put it, a place inside myself, a secret place, and I can go to that place and start writing from that place. I found that place when I was in my early teens, and I'll be 65, and the place is the same. So it's been there for 50 years by now.
How very satisfying to have your own special place to be.
Yeah, and my way of writing, I prefer not to prepare anything, to do any research or think out the structure or whatever. I just sit down. I know if I'm going to write a play or a kind of fiction, or of course a poem, and that's the only thing I know. And then I start, and if the beginning has what is needed, it has a kind of necessity to it that forces the rest of the text in a way. I have this really write, don't think, but it's an act of listening. I'm listening to something when I'm writing, to what I'm actually writing, of course, to what I've written, and then to something that brings the story, or what to call it, keep it going. And when I'm writing very well, then I don't have to write, it's just writing itself. But that's a possible way to say it, yeah.
It's a lovely way to say it. You're listening to some narrator within yourself telling you what to write. It's a very appealing image. The process, though, of translating what your mind is telling you to what your hand is actually writing is hard. Many writers would say that you have to go through a great apprenticeship to teach your hand to do what your mind is wanting it to do, if you like.
Writing with your hands, not with your brain, as Beckett said. He was completely right. It's a kind of playing to me. I started as a musician, as I told you, and I stopped playing. I turned to writing. And writing, it's comparable to playing music for me. And when doing that, you don't think first. You're playing jazz, for instance, you're improvising. You don't think like that, you just do it. Martin Heidegger, he said that art happens. And it's like that for me. It just happens. And when writing a novel or a play or whatever, at a certain point, I get this feeling that it's already written. Not inside me, but out there somewhere. And my job is to write down what is already written before it disappears.
Before it flies out the window towards the fjord.
Yes. So I think about writing. It's a kind of gift. A new novel or a new play, it's a gift I get. And because I feel it's a gift, I cannot write all the time. I need to have breaks or pauses when I don't write. You cannot get gifts all the time, of course.
In order to be receptive to gathering up your gift when it comes, is there a special way that you write? Does your situation for actually writing have to be a particular place or a way of writing?
No, I've been a writer for so many years, and this habit is so into my way of living or whatever, that I think I can write more or less all over the place, everywhere. But then I have to write by hand, not on a computer. I can sit on an airplane and have a notebook and one of my dear fountain pens and write there, for instance. That wasn't possible for me earlier. But in general, I can say that I need at least, the ideal situation for me is that I at least have 1 week with no disturbances. And then I start writing very early in the morning. For many years, I woke up so that I could start writing at 8, 9. For some years now, I've woken up quite early. So then I wrote my whole septology between 5 in the night and 9 in the morning.
There's something about those wee hours. You're in good company. Anthony Trollope always used to write, they say, between 5 and 8 in the morning, didn't they? And Murakami, I think, is another early writer.
Yeah.
What is it about those early hours?
They are the best hours for writing I've experienced. You know, earlier I loved to drink quite a lot, and I drank in the evenings. And I had to be completely sober to write. If I only had a glass of red wine, I lose my precision. I become somehow sentimental, and I can write and I can drink afterwards, but not at the same time. But then I quit drinking at all, and then what to do in the evening, I went to bed and went to sleep and woke up very early, and then I started writing very early. And that's how I experienced that this is the best time for writing in a way. The world is quiet. If you're living in a town, there are very few cars, for instance. You can hear a taxi here or there or something like that. And you yourself is quiet in a specific way. You aren't that quiet in yourself at 8 in the morning as 4 or 5 in the night, for sure. I also prefer to wake up and start writing as fast as possible, to go from the dream world in the sleep to the conscious dream world of the writing.
Ah, that's interesting. So no ritual sort of coffees and long breakfast to get you in the mood?
Always. I used to be a heavy smoker. I needed my cigarettes and coffee. In later years, I've changed to green tea and to snuff. Some nicotine and caffeine I need in the morning. But that's the only thing I need.
And you mentioned that you write with a fountain pen.
Yeah, I started out writing on a typewriter. I'm that old. I remember well my first computer. It was this old DOS system. You perhaps can even remember it.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I had my first Mac, and it was to me an adventure, an amazing thing. You could change the font, and you could have a completely clean script. When I used the typewriter, I always made typos here and there and had to change, and it was ugly, I think. It was much more beautiful when I had my first style writer and my first Mac. I had, for instance, the first portable Mac ever produced. It's very strange to think about. No, these portables are all over the place, but it was Steve Jobs. He was the man. And the same with the iPhone, it was Steve Jobs. So you have some inventors that have changed our lives more than I think people dare to think of. And I was very much fascinated by the Mac roughly until Steve Jobs passed away. Since then, it's been a boring story, I think. I'm still using the Mac. That's what I know how to use. But my fascination was gone. Perhaps I needed to be fascinated by something. And then my fascination changed to fountain pens, in fact. So I started to collect fountain pens and use them also. Earlier, I only wrote using a Mac then, and I corrected using a fountain pen when I printed out the script. They are peaceful. Fountain pens are very peaceful, and the act of writing by hand in a notebook, this is very peaceful action. I quoted Beckett, you are writing not by your head, but with your hand. You get this experience that you actually are writing with your hand. It becomes much more obvious when you are actually writing by your hand, especially to me with a fountain pen and on paper.
I like the fact that there have been these different phases, that there was the phases of the enjoyment of using the typewriter, which in some way is like a musical instrument, if you like.
Yeah, the keyboard, yeah. It's like playing on a keyboard or something, like when you are typing. But these movements of the writing, when you are writing by hand, it also gets this rhythm. But in another way, you understand? You can write fast or slow, and you never write exactly the same way. Your handwriting is always changing slightly. The musical dimension or the corporal dimension, or how to put it, your body is into the writing, either you use a keyboard or a fountain pen. Yeah.
Exactly. It's bringing a different sort of musicality to the whole work, because people, of course, look for that in the text itself, but that it's there in the creation of the text also is lovely.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. I feel that the writing process, at least, is quite different, or I experience it as quite different when I'm using a fountain pen. I guess that has to do that I've been a writer for so many years. I've written an enormous lot. So when I started, it was something new to me, this experience of writing by hand. It was easier not to disturb yourself by thinking, to put it that way, when I wrote by hand.
There's a more direct connection.
Yes. Yeah, I think some writers, you can almost tell that the books have been written by hand, not on a computer or on a typewriter. I think, for instance, the book of Knut Hamsun, to me, it's obvious. It couldn't be written on a typewriter or a computer.
What makes it obvious?
That's very hard to describe it. It has to do with this flow I was talking about and the inversion that he creates. You can feel that this is really written by hand. But it isn't that many years ago since they wrote with a ghost pen. Everything was written. Ibsen, for instance, you had the first fountain pens. It isn't that many years ago. So there's been an enormous development in the act of writing for over 100 years.
There's obviously a lovely simplicity about writing by hand. The simplicity of your writing, if one could call it that, it's a bit of a misnomer, but it's obviously something you construct, that your own reading, your own interests, and you've already mentioned, for instance, Heidegger in this conversation, are very complex, and you boil it down to a simplicity of language which is very striking. Is that purposeful? What is your thinking behind the simplicity?
I prefer not to have a purpose at all when writing. If you have a purpose, it's very easy to tell it when you read it. So the writing, it must have its own necessity and its own logic. And for me, when I write, I don't decide that I don't want to use that word or that word or like that. But especially in my plays, I'm writing about basic human situations. And in each and every language, don't lie to me, you use very simple words to describing your daily life actions. It's very easy to use a lot of words and to write complicated. That's the easiest thing. What is hard to manage, it's to write in a simple and deep way. My favorite painter, at least at the time being, it's Mark Rothko. There's a huge simplicity to his paintings, but at the same time, they are telling a lot. And all the details, and if you want, the repetitions and the variations, speaking all the time.
And one thing about Rothko is that if you, at least I've found that if you stand at different distances from his paintings, and of course if you look at them in different light, you get very different experiences. To stand just half a metre away from a Rothko is an utterly different experience from the experience of standing at the other end of a big gallery room.
Yeah, it is.
The levels of analysis.
Yeah, it is for sure. But still, his, I guess when he was painting, he had his arms and his brushes and so on. So he couldn't be that far away from the painting. So all the details I'm talking about, you have perhaps to go rather close to see them, all the variations. From a distance, you see only that color or that color or something like that. But to me, it's just to stand, let's say, 1 to 2 meters away from the painting and let the painting talk to me. And then it's not this or that, it's the wholeness of it that is speaking to me. And that it's in all kind of writing to me. And art, it's not the detail, it's the wholeness it's about. And the wholeness has a kind of silent spirit. And in a good production in the theatre, it's not the acting or the scenography or whatever. It's the wholeness of the production that makes it great. And this wholeness, it cannot speak, of course. It's silent. It has a silent voice. And that's a spiritual voice, I think. To me, it's this spiritual voice that is speaking very clearly from the paintings of Rothko. And each painting, this spirit is saying different things. I don't know how he managed, but he managed to do it. He painted those paintings, and was it easy to explain it? Then it was no art at all. Then everyone could do it, I guess.
Mm. But then, as you say, apparent simplicity, but such complexity contained within, yes.
Yeah, or deepness, there's a lot underneath. There's a lot in a Rothko painting. Each painting, of the greatest one at least, it's a universe, you could say.
And just to draw the parallel with your work, a great deal of darkness in Rothko's paintings.
Yeah, of course. But Rothko himself denied that he was trying, in a way, to paint his depression, or what to call it. I think he painted more to get rid of himself than to express himself. And I'm writing much more to get rid of myself than to express myself, for sure. So I don't believe in these people, I want to express it. No, I'm not interested at all. Perhaps in all those expressions, but not in what I might want to express. I don't find it interesting at all. And Rothko isn't expressing in that way. He's creating art. Art is something else than your subjective experiences or something like that. It's basically a transformation, and you are transcending or open up for a transcendental dimension in the process of writing, or in good art at all, in general, I would say. And it's all about that. Beckett, once again, he said that he didn't write about anything. If I would quote it, I would say, I'm not writing about anything. Nothing. But of course, when you're reading a novel or something, or a play or whatever, of course, it's about something. There are characters, it's a kind of plot to a certain level. They call it the universe, run by a lot of very complicated rules, different for each. They are not conscious, but then I have to know them somehow. And that's the same with Rothko when he painted a picture. It's a universe, and the way to describe it is to say that there are rules for it. It's a kind of language game, to use Wittgenstein's phrase. But these language games are so complicated that no brain, if it's good art, it isn't possible to have a conscious relation to them.
But whether you're an onlooker with a Rothko or a reader of your texts, it's very hard not to bring a search for meaning to your encounter with the work. And if you're writing without searching for meaning, you're simply creating, then is the reader wrong to try and find meaning in what you're writing?
No, it's in a certain way all about meaning, I think, understood the right way. It's not about communication, to communicate this or that, this message to, as an advertisement or something like that. But it's about meaning. And what is meaning? If you start thinking about it, what is it and why does it exist? Gadamer, the philosopher, he said that meaning is a wonder. And I agree that we can understand, for instance, the complexity of a Rothko painting to such a degree as it is possible, or understand the level of great writing to such a degree. It's a kind of wonder that it isn't possible to explain neither the process of Bach composing his music or the experience I get from listening to his music. It's a wonder, yeah. And then, of course, I've opened up a kind of spiritual dimension, and I had the pleasure of provoking a lot of people by thanking God when I made my speech at the banquet and even my lecture.
So let's go there. You grew up in the Protestant traditions of Western Norway.
My father and mother, they were believers, but in a very conventional, traditional way in that society. You never go to church. Normally, you go when there's a wedding or a burial or something. But my grandfather, he was a Quaker. And my grandmother on the other side, she was a kind of Puritan. So I knew about it. It was in my family. But the society I grew up in, it wasn't ruled or defined by these ideas. The people who believed in this or that way, they were outsiders more.
There was a backdrop of Protestantism, yes.
As it is in Norway and Sweden normally, I guess. It's a very secularized society. And it even was when I grew up. These Protestant societies, most of them have developed into very secularized societies. That started a long time ago, of course. In a way, it's in the center somehow of Lutheranism, I think. When I started to, mostly because of my own writing, to experience this other dimension, this invisible thing, I, at a certain point, started to think about God, or to use the word God, about something that had to do with this unknown side of life. And then I started also to search for a kind of religious community. And then I went to the Quakers and stayed with them. I never became an organized Quaker. I felt that was, as a good Quaker, you shouldn't be organized. It's against the spirit of Quakerism. Basically, I'm thinking and believing to a large degree as a Quaker, even by now.
That's interesting. So you're a Quaker at heart, but have found your way to the Catholic Church in the end.
Put it like that, yeah. And the one who helped me, it was the German mystic Meister Eckhart. He lived in the 13th century, and his writing has influenced me a lot since I first read it in the 80s. And what the Quakers are thinking and practicing, it's already described by Eckhart, the meaning of it, the point of it. Jon Fosse, he did it some 100 years later, but Meister Eckhart had already thought it 500 years earlier. So, in a way, through Meister Eckhart, I got an interest for the Catholic Church. He was an heretic, of course, and he died before he came to judgment. And I'm an heretic, of course, but in another time, thank God. The life of a writer is a lonely life. I needed something to stick to. And in Norway, there are 150 Quakers. Yeah. And in the whole world, there are rather few. And then when I started going to the Catholic Mass, I felt very much at home there, to be honest. It started with me, when as a playwright, I traveled all around the world, so to say, to see productions. And normally, if there were a cathedral or a church that was open, I walked in, and if it was a Catholic church, there were always someone sitting there in deep concentration praying. And to see these people sitting there in this empty church or cathedral, it impressed me a lot. But what I found when I started reading about Catholicism and going to the Mass, etc., it was that to me, the essence of Catholicism and the essence of Quakerism is approximately the same. It's about the mystery of faith. It's about God in each and every human being, the inner light, as the Quaker say it, or as the Catholic say it. You get it when you go to the Eucharist. You actually eat the spiritual body of Christ. And that's defined as the mystery of faith in the Catholic tradition. The elements in the Catholic Mass, they are the same, basically, as they have been for 2,000 years. And the texts are repeated and repeated and repeated again and again. Agnus Dei, the confession of the faith, etc., etc. So in the end, the words are repeated that many times that they, in a certain way, lose their normal meaning and are filled with a kind of silence.
Absolutely. So similar to, for instance, the Jesus prayer in Orthodoxy. Constantly repeated, it becomes something other than the words.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm praying that prayer a lot myself.
Do you do it in the way of the 33 repetitions or some particular number?
No. You just repeat and repeat. That's the father of the desert did.
Yes.
They just kept on repeating it.
I'm not familiar with the Jesus prayer myself, Adam. Would you mind telling us a bit about it?
Well, the form of it is, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Mm-hmm. So in very few words, it contains an awful lot of concepts. It sort of encapsulates the essentials of Christianity. Lord Jesus Christ places him in sort of ascendance, and then Son of God says who he is. And then have mercy on me, a sinner, is confessional. So that act of confession and recognition of one's sins is contained within that prayer. So it's sort of plenitude in little.
And Jon Fosse talks about the fathers of the desert using it. What does that mean?
The Desert Fathers were a bunch of hermits in the 3rd and 4th century, mainly, I think, in Egypt. Mm-hmm. And they were early Christians who retired to the desert, living mainly alone, and dedicated themselves completely to thinking about the nature of God and vied with each other in aestheticism. They tried to sort of be more awful to themselves than the next one in the next cave in order to heighten their sense of devotion, I suppose, and punish themselves for their sins and all the rest of it. But they also wrote, I think the Jesus prayer was first recorded on the wall of one of those caves. There was an author called Helen Waddell who translated some of the sayings of the Desert Fathers, and it was one of the books that used to hang around at home. So I used to dip into these and find them very confusing. But that was my first acquaintance with the Desert Fathers.
It's interesting that it did sort of spread out of the desert, the prayer, because it sounds like it's widely used.
Yeah, simplicity must be very appealing. Also, the fact that it is used as a repetitive prayer. I suppose it's almost like a chant. The standard practice is to say it over and over. And while I suppose you might dwell on the words and the meaning of the words, after a while it becomes, I suppose, sort of mantra-like. It's a way of calming down or cleansing your mind. It was very interesting to listen to Fosse talk about the fact that he likes the prayer because it ties in so well with the extensive repetition he uses as a device in his writing. And we talked about that. So let's return to the conversation. Repetition, of course, is a huge part of your own work. And people very frequently describe your work as being sort of hymnal, or it could be in a liturgical setting. What does repetition bring to you when you're writing, when you're actually writing the thing and you find your hand repeating the phrase or repeating the idea? Why?
I think it's quite simple that I moved from being obsessed by music to being obsessed by writing in a way. And I wanted to create a kind of music when writing. And what's fundamental to all kinds of music is repetition and variations. And so to create the literature as a kind of music, you need repetition. If you look for it in almost every good writer, you find a lot of repetitions. Go to Hemingway, for instance, or the one I'm translating at the time, it's Gerald Murnane. He is a great writer, I think, and he keeps on repeating all the time. But he isn't known for his repetition as I am. In my plays, I use the word pause, short pause, long pause a lot. And that's to get the right flow. I need it to be like that. But in my fiction, I cannot use that word, or not as frequently as in my plays. So my German translator, he had this theory that in my fiction, the repetitions are playing the same role as the word pause or silence in my plays. And I think he got the point. Yeah.
Yeah. It makes you stop and reflect on what you're reading.
Yeah, it becomes a silence. And silences are, of course, never the same. They are expressing quite different things, I think.
This takes us back to where we started. The search for silence and the difficulty of finding it in today's world.
Yeah.
And the importance of finding it.
I think to manage to somehow rest in yourself and to cope with your destiny as a human being, what we see, not that far away, it's our own death. You need to get some kind of silence into yourself, not to get afraid of dying, I think. Take all this music and all this mess all the time, doing thing, and you're trying to escape that. People are running and trying to live as healthy as possible, and etc., and they never survive.
Yes, you'll never win that game.
Try to get some peace and quiet, yeah. My writing, if you don't like it or doesn't give you anything, just fine. There's nothing wrong with you. It's okay. Yeah. Oh, but of course, I'm really happy that quite a lot of people find quite a lot in my writing, to put it that way.
That's lovely and permissive. Take me or leave me, but it's fine either way.
Yeah, you're not a bad human being if you don't understand maths on a certain level or music on a certain level. And if you don't understand my writing, you simply don't understand it. You don't have that kind of ear.
You know, that's a perfect endpoint. And I think it's particularly nice in today's world where everybody is pushing and pushing and pushing for the STEM subjects and maths and everything, to tell people it's okay not to understand maths.
It's okay not to understand a lot and not to manage a lot. We cannot manage everything, any of us. We aren't that clever, and we shouldn't try to be it either, I think.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
You just heard Nobel Prize Conversations. If you'd like to learn more about Jon Fosse, you can go to nobelprize.org, where you'll find a wealth of information about the prizes and the people behind the discoveries. Nobel Prize Conversations is a podcast series with Adam Smith, a co-production of Filt and Nobel Prize Outreach. The producer for this episode was Karin Svensson. The editorial team also includes Andrew Hart, Olivia Lundquist, and me, Claire Brilliant. Music by Epidemic Sound. If you're interested in more literary conversation, check out our episodes with 2021 Literature Laureate Abdul Razak Gurna or 1986 Laureate Wole Soyinka. You can find previous seasons and conversations on Acast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.